Pathway Therapy Conversations. Here, we confront the systems, conditioning, and professional realities people were taught to normalize, but rarely taught to question. Because eventually, every system reveals what it refused to confront. So, it's time to own it. Happy May, happy graduation to all the graduates out there, especially the social workers and the license. I want to congratulate you all. And again, since it's May, graduation season is here. There are new clinicians entering the field. Pre-licensed clinicians are working towards their hours, and this is a very exciting time for a lot of people. And I also want to shout out to my seasoned clinicians out there too, who may be reflecting back on their own professional development experiences, which I have, and this is why I decided to do this episode. The thing is, one of the questions underneath this episode, and why I chose to do is, why are so many clinicians carrying experiences they were never encouraged to speak honestly about? So, just a little rewind here. Back before the end of 2025, like December 2025, I decided to release a two-part episode about leaving a toxic workplace and eventually escaping that environment. And the thing is, the most ironic parts of reflecting back on those experiences in those episodes was realizing that some of the most professionally and personally dysregulating experiences of my career occurred while I was obtaining my clinical supervision hours for this field. The very period of time that was supposed to support my professional growth and create more opportunities for my future became one of the hardest seasons of my professional life. And that experience didn't only impact me professionally, it impacted me personally too. Thinking back on that experience, there were moments where I questioned, why does it feel this hard? Why does this profession centered around healing sometimes create environments that feel emotionally unsustainable for people trying to enter it? Looking back, those experiences forced me to start seeing systems differently. It forced me to start asking deeper questions about leadership, organizational culture, power, conditioning, professional identity, and what systems unintentionally produce in people over time. And after releasing those episodes, many pre licensed and even fully licensed clinicians privately reach out to me, sharing their own experiences too. One of the themes that repeatedly emerged was disillusionment. People questioning, is this worth it? Can I sustain this long term? Why does becoming a clinician feel this emotionally difficult? Because becoming a pre licensed therapist or social worker is already a professionally vulnerable stage. Many clinicians quietly adapt to systems that normalize fear, silence, overwork, hyperindependence, and survival based functioning during some of the most formative years of their professional development. And I just want to clarify this episode is not about attacking the profession, not at all. That, you know what? A healthy supervision does exist, healthy leadership does exist, supportive mentorship does exist. And this honestly should be the standard. But many clinicians are describing systems patterns that sound remarkably similar. We cannot change systems we refuse to examine. Because the deeper question underneath this conversation is, what are systems producing in clinicians and why? One of the most important things to say clearly is this: for many clinicians, the hardest part of the work is not necessarily the clients themselves. Because when we get into this job, this field, we know that we're going to probably work with the hardest of the hard or the most marginalized within the community. Clinicians enter the field expecting the emotional intensity. What many do not expect is how emotionally unsustainable organizational conditions can become over time. And this is where many clinicians begin experiencing profound dissonance. Because organizations often promote self care, boundaries, wellness, and emotional regulation, while structurally reinforcing chronic overload. So, that right there is the incongruence right there. And over time, clinicians begin internalizing system strain as personal failure. Another question emerges underneath this dynamic is, what does organizational strain repeatedly become individualized onto the clinician instead of examined at the systems level? So, in some of my other leadership and mental well being episodes, I talk about how personalized coaching or resilient coaching or some sort of executive coaching is always put back on the individual without ever examining what the system is producing in the people who are working in the system. So, for example, when clinicians become overwhelmed or emotionally flooded or behind on documentation or unable to sustain impossible demands, the response often becomes, well, you can improve your time. Or how's your time management? Or, you know what you should do? You should probably try to regulate better. You know what? I know you're overworked and you need to strengthen your boundaries. Or everybody's favorite, practice better self care. While the organization is saying that the conditions producing the strain remain largely untouched. And this is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore because organizational strain repeatedly becomes individualized onto clinicians while the system conditions produce the very strain remainly largely unexamined. Many clinicians are not failing because they are incapable. They are attempting to function inside systems that continuously demand adaptation without sufficient structural support. And adaptation without support is survival based functioning. Pre-license. Pre-licensed clinicians, and I remember this so clearly as a pre-licensed clinician. Pre-licensed clinicians occupy especially vulnerable positions inside this dynamic. Before organizational dysfunction even enters the picture, they are already navigating licensure dependence, supervision dependence, financial pressure, yes, financial pressure, professional evaluation, and uncertainty around long term sustainability. That vulnerability matters because when professional survival becomes tied to supervision, approval, hours, references, or organizational acceptance, many clinicians learn very quickly which realities feel safe to speak out about and which do not. Silence cultures do not remove dysfunction, they normalize it. So let's move on to general conditioning in the helping professions. Many helping professions have been so conditioned to normalize pain as part of the professional development and growth. This extends beyond therapy and social work. The underlying message becomes push through, prove yourself, earn your place, show that you can handle it. And over time, endurance becomes confused with professional worth. Many professionals begin learning that belonging requires tolerating chronic emotional strain, and systems reinforce that expectation generationally. The underlying belief becomes this: if I survive this environment, you should be able to survive it too. How many of us have heard that be passed through, or have heard our mentors or somebody else say, if I had to go through it, you did too? And that, unfortunately, is how organizational conditioning sustains itself. Because people often reproduce what was normalized around them, especially when those patterns remain unexamined. Helping professions understand this dynamic clearly. And, it makes me think about, not makes me think, but parallels family systems work. When I was doing one on one therapy, people often came to therapy trying to break relational patterns that they inherited grown up. Organizations are not exempt from those same behavioral dynamics because people adapt to what these systems reward, what leadership tolerates, and what organizations repeatedly normalize. So over time, survival based adaptation begins looking perfect. So this next section talks about race, culture, and power dynamics inside professional systems. And this needs to be acknowledged because these systems experiences are not experienced equally by everyone. Because power dynamics already exist inside professional environments. And for many um, BIPOC clinicians, pre-licensed professionals, and marginalized professionals, those dynamics become even more complex during supervision, consultation, leadership interactions, and organizational training environments. In my own experience, as a social worker, as a pre-licensed therapist, and especially doing the work that I do, I was often one of the very few BIPOC clinicians within a predominantly white professional. And in my own experience, I was often one of the very few BIPOC clinicians within a predominantly white professional space. Many of my supervisors, leadership structures, and consultation spaces and organizational systems were overwhelmingly white. And that matters because culture shapes what systems interpret as professionalism, safety, competence, authority, and credibility. And I remember moments in case consultation discussions where I would offer perspective rooted in cultural nuance, systems context, family structure, or lived understanding. And those perspectives would sometimes immediately be challenged, reframed, or filtered through a dominant cultural lens. Because professional systems often normalize dominant culture interpretations as objective standards. And over time, that shapes whose behavior is perceived as credible, professional, emotionally appropriate, or easier for systems to validate. Helping professions cannot claim to understand human behavior while ignoring the power dynamics shaping their own organizations. Because systems influence those experiences, become normalized, whose concern becomes minimized, and whose realities become easier for organizations not to fully see. Many systems are not intentionally trying to create harm. Many systems are inherited, kind of like generation trauma. It's like I didn't ask for the trauma and I inherited. And many organizations and systems are very much like this. People step into leadership roles carrying organizational conditioning they were never taught to examine. They inherit system patterns that were often normalized long before they even enter leadership. So, what happens over time? Nations begin mistaking survival based adaptation for professionalism, for competence, and commitment because systems condition people through repetition. People adapt to what leadership normalizes. And leadership does not only shape organizations through policies, leadership shapes organizations through behavior, tolerance, reinforcement, avoidance, and what repeatedly goes unchallenged. That is why leadership inconsistency creates organization confusion because systems absorb behavior faster than they absorb mission statements. Yep, I said that. And many organizations continue operating from inherited systems conditioning without realizing the long term human impact of those environments. Because survival based systems can still appear functional externally. People still show up, yes. They still do their job, yes. Numbers still get met. Productivity still happens. But underneath the surface, people slowly disconnect from themselves, from each other, and from the mission itself. Pressure enters every system. Leadership determines whether pressure gets contained structurally or transferred directly onto its people. So, as we close down the episode, this is what remains. Helping professions cannot continue discussing healing while remaining disconnected from the system conditions shaping clinicians internally. Because humans adapt to systems they survive inside of. And systems influence does not disappear simply because organizations have good intentions. Good intentions do not automatically create healthy organizational cultures. Systems can still shape behavior. And many clinicians are not simply experiencing individual stress. Many are adapting to systems conditions that normalize chronic survival functioning as professionalism. This is why systems integrity matters because organizations do not only impact productivity, they shape human experience, and the long term question beneath all of this is not how to get more clinicians to endure more. The better question is are organizations developing clinicians or conditioning them to survive the dysfunction? Because those are not the same thing. Because systems produce what they normalize, and humans adapt to the environments they survive inside of. So maybe the conversation helping professions need to start having is not simply how do we help the people heal, but what kind of systems are we creating for the people responsible for providing that healing in the first place? Because organization culture is not separate from human impact, it becomes human impact. Until helping professions are willing to examine the systems conditions shaping clinicians internally, many organizations will continue confusing survival with professionalism. And I know that a lot of people are probably watching this and say, but Paya, how do I even change this if I don't have power? And I understand. I understand that there are some things beyond our out of our power. But this message is for the people who do have power, who do have system influence, and who do have um, a way to change the system. And this is for the people who have that power or that proximity to power and have a voice and say, you know what? we need to make a change within our system. So I know that there are some things that we've been very conditioned to stay quiet about. And I hope that this episode can really help empower helping professions to start asking these questions. So that is all I have for you all this week. I hope you all stay safe, stay well, take care of you, especially. And again, this is your own pathway therapy conversations where we confront the systems, conditioning, and realities people were taught to professionally contain. And now it's time to own it. I'll see you all next time. Bye.